Hello, Cousin Johnny here. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the Buzzin' with Cousins show. We thank you. Thank you, that garlic stuff. If you like garlic, you're going to love it. Put it on just about anything. That garlic stuff. Tuesday, Alvarado Farmers Market, or go to thatgarlicstuff.com. Thank you. Thank you, I Heart You Candles and Gifts. 222 17th Street, Pacific Grove. Beautiful hand-poured candles made with love. Go see Sherry at 222 17th Street in Pacific Grove. I Heart You Candles and Gifts. Thank you. Thank you, Max Fit Meals, 520 Fremont Street. Grab and go healthy meals. They're delish. On your way from home from work, go grab some, heat them up, and fantastic. Thank you, Suds Cyber Laundry, 709 Lighthouse, Pacific Grove. Great modern machines, big screen TV, coffee, and a great friendly staff. Thank you, Suds. Thank you, the Whiskey Club, 425 Alvarado Street. Over 600 whiskeys to choose from. Go on in, relax, enjoy a nice whiskey. They also have a bottle shop. It's great. Great place to relax and enjoy. Tell them a cousin sent you. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, storyteller, author, and all-around good guy, Tony Albano. Tony has written 3 books, the latest being Cherish, about a New York teenager and a nun find love. Thank you, Tony. And if you want to order the book or find out more about Tony, go to Tony, Tony, Albano, Albano, storyteller.com. Check it out. Thank you. Thank you, sponsors, for the Buzzin' with Cousins show. We thank you. Hello, how's everybody doing out there? Cousin Johnny here, bringing you another show. All you Monterey history buffs, you're in for a big treat today, because today we have a special guest, historian Tim Thomas. And we're so proud to have him on. Today we're going to talk about the great Sardine era, the sardine capital of the world, Monterey. And before further ado, please welcome Tim Thomas.
Cousin Johnny.
Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good today.
Thank you for coming on. And as usual, when I have you on, I always thank you for what you do in Monterey, preserving this beautiful Monterey history of this beautiful, great place we live at.
Well,
So Tim, the Sardine era, Steinbeck, Ed Ricketts, for all the people for the few people that don't know anything about it, let's start with this great Sardine era. How did it happen?
Well, let's go back a little bit. So the sardine fishery in Monterey and California was the largest fishery of single fish in the history of the United States. All for a fish at no point ever in its history, all for a fish that really nobody ever really wanted to eat. Monterey, California sardines were never a popular fish to eat, but it was heavily fished for a variety of different reasons. The real money actually was always in the can, not in the canned product. The real money was always in the byproducts, and I'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay, great.
It doesn't really start with sardines. It really starts with salmon. Salmon was king before 1915. Salmon was a big fishery in California, in Monterey in particular, and it was Japanese fishermen that were doing that. And just to give you an idea of how large that was, at the end of the 1909 salmon season, which lasted about 3 months, the Monterey Daily Cypress, which was the local newspaper, then reported at the end of that 1909 salmon season, there were 185 sailboats fishing the Monterey Bay, 145 of them were Japanese owned, catching an average of 1 million pounds of king salmon in 3 months. 1 million.
Wow,
That's a lot of fish. Actually, they caught 1,500,000 pounds of king salmon in 1909. In 1910, they caught 2 million pounds of king salmon. In those days, people in the United States ate a lot of sardines. Sardines were very popular. They were almost like we would eat crackers or potato chips today, but the sardines we were eating weren't these guys right here.
Beautiful.
They're eating those little guys, right? Sardine is kind of a generic word. Almost all small silvery fish are referred to as a sardine, but the catch in California along the west coast or all the way into South America really is this guy known as a pilchard or the true sardine. But the sardines people wanted to eat were those little guys, those guys coming out of the North Atlantic, coming out of Europe, right? Okay. France was a big sardine producer at the turn of the 20th century. So all those sardines are really coming from Europe at that time. And all that salmon that were being caught here in Monterey, those 2 million pounds that were being caught in 3 months, well, where was that going? It wasn't going here. There wasn't really a local market for it. Majority of that stuff is going to Europe, going mostly to Germany. Germany was about 90% of it was going to Germany. That's where the market was. What happened in the world in 1914? World War I, because of all that salmon going to Europe, all those sardines coming from Europe, and they just switch. You're going to heavily fish sardine along the west coast. There were sardine canneries in New York State and Maine. Those guys couldn't fish because there were German submarines out there in the Atlantic.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
They began to build sardine canneries along the Monterey waterfront. In fact, the original plan was to build them starting about where Wharf Number 2 is today. The blueprints were drawn up, plans are being made to build these canneries all along the waterfront. But the folks at the Hotel Del Monte were very unhappy with this idea because they were convinced you build sardine canneries along the Monterey waterfront, the tourists wouldn't come. And the Hotel Del Monte had a lot of economic power in this town at that time.
Yeah.
City of Monterey said, wait a minute, there's money to be made here. They said, all right, all you sardine processors go way down there at the end of Ocean View Avenue. And that's how Cannery Row becomes Cannery Row. And then there was Mr. Booth Cannery, which was the only cannery actually in Monterey proper. It was right next to the Monterey Wharf. All the other canneries were actually in New Monterey at that point. And so they began to heavily fish sardine along the west coast after that World War I thing. And then during the war, there was a big demand for them for the war effort. So there was a big push that way too.
Tim, how many canneries were here during the heyday?
So during the heyday, there were 19 canneries operating, and I think there's 20 different reduction plants operating. So as I mentioned, Monterey sardine never was a popular fish to eat. People thought it was too big and too oily. The real money always was in the byproducts. They take the heads, tails, the guts, and they grind them up for other products, animal feed, fertilizer, that kind of thing, right? Next time you all go to the market and buy chicken for dinner, you can thank this guy right here for that chicken dinner. Because prior to 1920, the chicken was not doing very well. People did not eat chicken like we do today. It was kind of expensive. Began to produce this cheap chicken via the head, tails, and guts of the Monterey sardine. The chickens loved it, thrived on it. More and more chickens being produced. The price of chicken went down. People began to buy chicken. My friend Bill Ripley, who is a retired biologist, used to say that Foster Farm chicken owes its life to the boom to the Monterey sardine.
Perfect. Yeah. All right. That's good to know.
Yeah. That's true.
That's a good tidbit. Yeah. So, Tim.
Then there was a lot of work to try to control that.
Yeah.
Fish and Game, which came into Monterey early. They opened the office at Hopkins Marine Station in 1919 just to monitor the sardine fishery at that time. They saw this happening that, because the reduction process was easy. It didn't take a lot of workers in the building to do it, and so they were concerned, and so they tried to pass rules, try to pass laws to try to control that. So eventually they passed different got legislation passed that said that only a certain percentage of the catch could go into the reduction process. Although those guys, the canneries, fought against that, and were sometimes just using the whole catch going into that reduction process. And there were lawsuits. I won't with all that stuff, but there was all kinds of things going on around all that.
Tim, what date are we talking about? Was that in the 20s you were talking now?
Fishing game started passed their first law in 1918. That's how early they saw this happening in California, in Monterey. And so they were very concerned about it. They did open their offices in 1919 at Hopkins Marine Station, and they would, because they were close to the canneries. So initially they'd go into the canneries every morning. They'd meet the fishermen, and they kept records, what they called interview cards, where they would interview the fishermen, how much fish they caught, where they caught them. They'd take samples of the fish back to their office at Hopkins, where they'd weigh them and measure them and sex them and brought them back to the canneries, which I think is the best part, so the canneries wouldn't lose any fish. Because of that kind of work they were doing, and they're also doing this in Southern California, there was another large sardine fishery. They were able to establish a sardine season. So prior to 1929, there was no sardine season. They just fished sardines whenever they appeared in the bay, which is usually about the middle of the summer months at that point. And okay. But in Monterey, they were able to establish the season. Monterey season went from August 1st to February 15th. In Southern California, it started in October and went all the way into April. So there were a number of fishermen, mostly Japanese fishermen from Southern California, that come up to Monterey to fish sardine here, starting in August, and then returning back to Southern California, where they could fish sardine almost all the way into April. So it could be almost a whole year doing that kind of thing.
Now, Tim, in the heyday, how many boats were in Monterey?
Depends, it would fluctuate from year to year, but the heyday, there was over 100 of them coming in. Not all from Monterey. Again, there were Southern California boats coming up here. Those were, again, mostly Japanese fishermen. They're also coming down from Washington and Oregon as well to fish sardine here. And oftentimes, those guys that live on their boats during the season. There was a Japanese hotel in Monterey the Japanese fishermen would stay. So it was all kinds of things.
So there was, out of those 100 boats, there was mostly Sicilian and Japanese fishermen.
Sicilian, yeah, most of it was a Sicilian fishery. So what brought those Sicilian guys here was when Mr. Booth came to Monterey, and he was in the salmon business at that time up along the Sacramento River. And into the 19th century, the salmon business wasn't doing very well up there. And so all the processors formed this co-op called the Sacramento River Packers Association. I heard these big landings going on in Monterey, all because of these Japanese fishermen that arrived here and new technology that was introduced to salmon fishing by sport fishermen. He came down and said, "Hey, this is great," and tried to get contracts with Japanese fishermen. They said, "No, we got good contracts in market in San Francisco." So he backs off, builds a little shed near the Monterey Wharf where Heritage Harbor is today, and then began to experiment with these large sardines that are appearing in the bay at the end of the salmon season.
Okay.
He needed starting fishermen at this point because at that time, a lot of the Japanese fishermen were leaving Monterey to go work in the ag fields in the Central Valley of California, only to turn into spring to fish salmon. As I'm sure you're aware that at the turn of the 20th century, there was a great deal of anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States, coming mostly from white workers who convinced the Japanese are coming to take their job, which really wasn't the case.
Right.
In 1905, Mr. Booth said to the local newspaper, "Not going to hire any more Japanese," which was a really easy call for him because he didn't really mean it. He already had Japanese workers in his cannery at that point, and he was still going to hire those guys to fish salmon when they returned in the spring. But it was that instant he sent for these Sicilian fishermen who already worked for him up along the Sacramento River fishing salmon, come down here to Monterey to start fishing sardine as that small secondary fishery in the fall and winter months.
Perfect, yeah. And Tim, the term purse seiner, for people that don't know, what is that term?
The term refers to the type of netting that they're using on the boat. So the first purse seiners came into Monterey in 1926. Before that, they were fishing with Monterey boats, which is net that Sicilians brought from Sicily with them. And Monterey and Sicilian or Italian essentially translates to meaning lightning because it was fast. But the purse seine was bigger. and the boats were bigger. And what people don't, in 1926, in 1930, those boats, there was a lot of resistance to those boats coming into Monterey because it took less fishermen to work on them, and also they were expensive. In 1930, a per center new one could cost up to $30,000, which doesn't
Right.
the net was another $10,000 or $15,000. So that's like in $1930. I mean, that's doing
That's crazy.
huge amount of money. You could buy a neighborhood of homes in Monterey for that kind.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could buy a lot at that time for $1,100 or something. I mean,
Those guys were able to get money. They got loans from the Bank of Italy, which is now the Bank of America, and other places to get to invest in and get those boats built.
I remember growing up in Monterey. I mean, that was probably the tail end of the industry, probably in the '60s, uh, maybe late '50s, '60s. Down where the aquarium is was the Holden Cannery.
Right.
I would walk by with a couple friends, and I could see my grandmother on the assembly line working working that assembly line with the packing sardines, and we would just walk in. I mean, it was like no questions asked.
Right.
My grandmother would stop, give us a hug, and off we went. So I mean, that's how low key it was at that time. But I remember the Holden Cannery, and
she was working though for Portolico's. Holden sold that cannery right in 1950.
I got a label right here that I found in a book.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, Carmel. Yeah.
And so Tim, there's the Pat Hathaway collection.
Right.
I just got a couple photos that I just printed out just for today, and maybe we could go over what they are.
Sure.
So here we go. We got looks like a crew there working away.
Those guys work on their per se net there, right? And that's at the Monterey Wharf, and those big vats you can see behind them. Those are tanning vats that was ran by the Rappa family. So those nets are made of cotton, and they had to be treated, and so they would treat them in this with the tan oak solution. And of course, the tan oak solution, it was just the bark of a tan oak tree, which was coming mostly from the Big Sur area, and hot water, and they would just treat those nets almost every day, protect them from the.
So this is a wharf where Rappa's used to be. I think it's called
in the background, wharf number 2, actually, in that picture.
Okay. Let's see what else we got here. There's the fleet.
There's the fleet, yeah.
Over 100 boats. And those boats, what was the average catch, you think, for those?
Yeah, they peak. These guys could bring in, depending, 100 ton of sardine with a deck load and everything.
Wow, that's crazy, yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed that some of they're called purse seiners now because they use that.
Right.
net.
Right.
Some of these boats, I think in the earlier era, they had just a flying bridge.
Right.
And a couple, maybe, I don't know, 5, 6 years later, they had an enclosed cabin. So I guess the different progress, I guess.
Well, they went so there was the Lampara boats, and there was what they call the half ringer or Japanese round haul, which was a cross between the purse seiner and the Lampara boat, and then eventually all went to these purse seiners. There's too much money to be made in this business at that time, and they were making money.
They were making money, yeah.
And the boats would be 12 guys on the boat, and the captain, and they would you get paid like on Fridays. You went to the captain's house. A lot of these Brazilian fishermen in their homes, the captains actually had 2 kitchens, one for the family, and downstairs they always had one for the crew. And you go have dinner before the Friday night's fishing, and you would get paid.
I remember an old photo. I don't think I have that, but
yeah,
there was you could see the crew going on the skiff,
yeah,
going after their first thing or the fish that night,
Right.
all the crew on the skiff, they all had suits and ties on. I
Oh,
guess
yeah. You dressed up. You went to work. Everybody else, you dressed up when you went to work.
that's a business. They're businessmen.
Exactly.
That's what it was.
And then how that net operates, of course, called a purse seine, because they would, once they saw a school of sardine, then that big skiff would take one end of the front end of that net, and he would go clockwise around the school of fish, and then the big boat, the purse seiner, would go counterclockwise with the other end of that net, circling around the whole school of fish. It could be 1,500 feet in circumference and drop a couple of 100 fathoms into the bay.
That's crazy.
And then they pull it back up. They actually had what they call a submarine light that would be dropped, because sardine were fished at night. They drop it into the bay, and the light would just flash on. The idea was to scare the sardines into the net, and then they'd pull up on that net with a big winch, and it would close up like a big purse. That's the name, purse seine. In the early days of the sardine fishery, they fished sardines during the daytime. And the fishermen go out and they would listen. And this is my favorite thing. An old fisherman told me, he said, we'd go out and we'd listen for this flip in the water that schooling fish would make. I just love that.
Looks like there's an inspector there inspecting.
The fishing game guy, and they would inspect the sardines. Absolutely, yeah.
Now there's that net you were talking about. It kind of
pulling up the big net full of fish. There he is.
Kind of like a purse. They were saying that's how I got the name.
There was a size though, and fishing game couldn't control. They tried, but they couldn't control how much fish they could take. But they could control the size. So you had to be at least 7 inches before you could bring them up into the boat. And oftentimes they bring up a net full of fish like this, and it'd be under 7 inches, and they just have to dump them back into the bay. But at that point, they're all dead. At that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There looks like some fish coming down, getting ready.
Ladder. You're going up the fish ladder into the cannery.
Into the cannery, yeah.
From those hoppers, those sardine hoppers that were put into the bay in 1926, when the big boat started arriving. There it is, right there. This was an idea of Newt Hogan's, who saw these kind of hoppers working in the ag fields in California, where you put the hopper in the middle of the field, and they put the fruits and vegetables in the hopper, and then they go by a conveyor belt into the cannery. He figured, why can't they work in the bay? And so his engineers designed these systems that work with a marine pump. And the fish would go up, because the boats were too big. We couldn't come up to the cannery to unload their fish. And that's just the way the Monterey Bay is, the Monterey Harbor and Bay is kind of designed. They couldn't get those boats in here. So you go up to the hoppers, drop your catch into the hopper, and they'll funnel down this little opening. And the
right. Wow. That's crazy.
These hoppers could take 70 tons an hour and would scale the fish as they went through them.
Yeah. And also, what you were telling me before was the dangerous work of the hard hat divers that were down below trying to keep these hoppers going, because I guess they would break down every now and then. So that must
Eddie Bushnell was the guy who put the lines in. You could still dive on those. Actually, they're still out there. And you have to use dynamite when they first put them in. But he would maintain these things. They pull out of the water every so many years to clean them and stuff. Yeah.
Now, you listeners out there, when you go over there where El Torito is,
right,
and, next door, there's an old vacant lot that's been vacant there for a million years. But
right.
There's an old hopper putting up on that. If you drive by, you can check it out.
That's right.
And
one along the coast, one along the bike trail, right, one near the Coast Guard pier. You can walk up and take a look at it.
Yeah, it's cool. And for people that don't know, and tourists that are coming in and they go eat at the fish hopper, they think it's some kind of a character hopping around, like.
And these are all.
They don't realize it's an actual thing, a fish hopper.
And they're all made of redwood, and they were made by the Sino family. Monterey Boat Works made those hoppers.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's Sino.
And Monterey is the only place in the world where this system was ever used.
Wow, that's really great.
And that's into the retorts. That's how they cook those sardines. So once they're into the canneries, there's actually a whole 3.3 system. There's a whole system to cook these sardines, and but once they're canned, they actually go through a pre-cooking process first before they put the lids on the cans, and then they add the condiments. Usually it's tomato ketchup or mustard. Then they put the lids on them. They seal the lids, put them in these big baskets called retort baskets. They go in these retorts, or just big cookers, and they're cooked under a low pressure, about 240 degrees, for about an hour and a half. And in theory, steam, right? That's what cooks them. Steam drove those whole cannons, and so there's a lot of water. But in theory, once they're canned like that, they'll last forever inside those cans. So
now the Monterey Bay Aquarium has a little section there. When you walk in to your left, it has some artifacts from the sardine era. I think that's a boiler there, or something similar to what
the boilers are there and everything. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So Tim, now, so everything. What was the biggest year in history of the sardine?
Well, it was the 1939-1940 season, and they brought in over 800,000 tons of sardine into Monterey.
That's crazy.
And that was a huge year. And it was so big. They made so much money that in March of 1941 or 1940, they held a huge party for the whole entire Monterey Peninsula, and everybody went down to the wharf number 2, where they set up big long table. They had the free steak dinner, and they had all kinds of dances and contests.
Wow, what a celebration!
It was the same year, same weekend actually, Steinbeck and Ricketts went down to Mexico, to Baja, for that famous trip they did.
Lucia Cortez.
Yeah, but that was sort of the beginning of the end of the sardine season, right? Because it began to drop after that. Yeah, and so.
And then it slowly started dropping after that.
It did, and there was it never peaked that high, but it did peak up a few years. But that really dropped by 1950. It was essentially over. But they had plenty of warnings about it. They had warnings beginning as early as 1929. For Fish and Game said, "You guys need to slow this down, or this fish is going to collapse in several years." And they didn't pay any attention. I mean, Fish and Game at that time didn't have any power. All they could do was make recommendations. All the power lied with the Fish and Game Commission, which was then a group of mostly businessmen who were going to be sympathetic to other businessmen like cannery owners. And those canneries actually hired their own scientists to tell them what they wanted to hear. They were also warned again in 1939 by another Fish and Game biologist named Frances Clark, who was a woman way ahead of her time. She was the first Fish and Game person to receive a PhD, which she got in 1925. She wanted to run all the sardine programs that Fish and Game did, including this very extensive, beginning in 1938, they did a sardine tagging program to look at how the sardines are being affected, in not just here, but also in Southern California by the catch. They'd bring them in, and they'd catch them, bring them on their boats, and they'd weigh them, measure them, and sketch them, and they would tag them, and then drop them back into the bay. And then somebody from Fish and Game would go in. Actually, an old friend of mine named Bill Ripley did this. They go into all the reduction plants and pick up all the stuff that reduction plants. Frances Clark had installed in all the reduction plants these big 50-pound magnets and pick up all this stuff. And so he'd go in and pick up the stuff the magnet picked up, to sort out, to find the little numbered metal tags. Because of that work they were doing in 1939, Frances Clark said, you guys need to cut this fishery in half.
Yeah.
Nobody paid any attention. Of course, the fishery does eventually collapse. And when it does collapse, Frances Clark is the only government official, state or federal, who said it collapsed because you guys didn't listen.
Yeah.
Actually, collapses for different reasons. Overfishing, in my opinion, and not just mine, others as well, fishing plays a small role in this. That there were environmental issues. Water temperature changes, in particular, the water temperatures in Monterey Bay began to drop after 1940. The sardines don't like that colder water, and I mean, who does, right?
Yeah.
We now know that sardines and anchovies tend to make these massive disappearances every 60, 70 years. So we now think that Monterey sardine was sort of on its declining cycle already, beginning after 1960. and we just kind of hastened the process.
And when was the complete collapse? Like late 50s or?
Really, it was in the early 50s. And there was canneries operating still. Hovis Cannery sold his cannery in 1950 and became Portola Cannery, and they canned sardines. And then there was where Carmel Cannery was there. They operated periodically, but not all the time when the catch would come in. But eventually, all went to squid catching, canning squid and stuff.
A lot of squid, yeah. So,
sardines have made a comeback. I mean, they're out there.
Yeah, I've heard they're out there. Yeah,
not the numbers they were in 1939. I've been told that they will go back to those numbers. Maybe not in my lifetime, but there isn't really a market for it. Although you can go to the Safeway today and buy a can of sardines in the big cans. There's California Girl on there.
Yeah,
those are probably California sardines either caught here or caught in Mexico. Same sardine. But what they do with them is they flash freeze them, ship them to Asia, Vietnam, and China, where they can them there, and then ship them here, and you can buy them at Safeway for $2, $2.50.
Now, the Sicilians in Monterey, and then the people that migrated here to this area. Now, then there's a lot of Sicilians up in the Concord, Pittsburgh area.
Right.
Was that they come here and then they went there, or did they go there and then come here? How did that work?
Well, I know when the Sicilians first started coming to California, the Genovese actually had settled in San Francisco at that point, and they were also here in Monterey a little bit too. And I've been told that the Genovese and Sicilians didn't always get along. And so Sicilians ended up in what's now Pittsburgh.
Okay, yeah.
Area, and we're fishing salmon and others, and sardine eventually as well. And then when the sardine fishery really began to take off here in Monterey after 1915, they began to come this way down to Monterey area, began to heavily fish sardine here. So really, but the sardine fishery in Monterey, I'll tell you this, and I've been doing this kind of work for over 40 years now.
Yeah.
Monterey is the only place that I've been able to find where the fishermen had one union. For Southern California and Northern California, all the ethnic groups had their own separate unions. In Monterey, they had one. And I think that's primarily because Monterey is a small town. It was then, it still is today.
Yeah.
And these guys grew up together. They all went to school together. They all played together. But the real key is these boys all played baseball together right across the street from the JACL Hall, right next to the Sports Center, Jack's Park.
Yes.
It wasn't uncommon for these young Japanese boys to learn to speak some Italian before they learned to speak English. And those boys learned to speak some Japanese.
Yeah, that's it. And by the way, I just want to give you a plug because you're the curator of that really great museum there at the Japanese American League there on Adams Street?
Adams Street, right.
So if anybody gets a chance, Tim, you're there, Saturdays usually? Or?
Well, we don't have any set hours. So if anybody's interested in seeing the museum, they just need to contact me, and I'll be happy to open it up for them.
That'd be great. You took me on that tour before, and it's really great. And Tim, you also do a historical tour. One first Saturday of the month?
I do walking tours on the first Saturday every month of the Monterey waterfront. Starts at the Monterey Wharf, and it's a free tour, 2 hours, but you just have to let me know you're going to be there. So it starts at 10 o'clock on the first Saturday every month. Meets in front of the Harbor House.
You just show up, or do you need to?
You need to contact me first, so I know someone's going to be there.
Okay, and that's your website is what, Tim?
My email is timsardine@yahoo.com.
timsardine@yahoo.com.
Right.
In case anybody forgets, get a hold of me. I'll get a hold of Tim. But it's a great tour. And what do you do? Fisherman's Wharf? Is that?
Wharf, and it goes around that little neighborhood, and it's really kind of a cultural history of Monterey. And we talk not only about sardines, but we talk a lot about abalone, whaling, squid. All those get covered in that tour.
That's really great. Yeah, and we've taken that tour with some friends there, and we really enjoyed it. And another thing that you've done that we really enjoyed was the tour of up on the hill by the museum at the Presidio. Well, the Presidio Museum. That's a really great tour, also. So,
yeah, thank you.
I mean, you're a history buff like I am. You would really enjoy it. So, Tim, is there anything you want to add to what we said today or what you said?
Well, I just think sardines are really important to the history of this community. Monterey wouldn't be what it is today without that sardine fishery that was here and those Sicilian fishermen that came here, and other fishermen that came here, all because of this guy right here.
That guy right there, yeah.
By that sardine fishery, everybody in Monterey had some connection to it one way or another.
Yeah,
you worked in it, or your neighbor did, or you had some kind of connection to it. So play that.
Well, my grandfather came here to fish sardines. Then my dad came, and then a lot of other people came. So I mean, I've got some history with that, and that's why I wanted to bring you on, because a lot of people that kind of know a little bit about it. It's a nice refresher, and and plus you learn something every time I talk to you. You learn a little more. And these young people and some of these tourists that come into town and go to Cannery Row, that's how it all started. Was
that's
the Sardine era.
This guy here, we have Buzzing with Cousin, right?
That guy right there. So Tim,
reminded me. So one last thing.
Go ahead.
I mentioned Cannery becomes Cannery because the city wanted to push it all the way down there. But to think of Cannery Row, we think of John Steinbeck's book Cannery Row, which really doesn't have anything to do with Cannery Row, actually, other than takes place on Cannery Row. But that street was called Cannery Row for a very long time, long before Steinbeck wrote that book. I mean, the earliest reference I've ever seen to have been called Cannery Row appears in a local newspaper in 1919. And we unfortunately don't know who that writer was that coined the phrase, because the writers just didn't get bylines in those days.
Beautiful. So I like the way that they kind of, when you go down Cannery Row, you got those overpasses.
Yeah.
You know, to go across the street, and that was for, I guess, when the canneries, they had the packing on one side and then the storage on the other side. But they kept those overpasses up.
There's only one though that's still original, that's still there. And you can still cross it. The Monterey Canning Building.
Oh yeah, that one you could cross it.
You could cross that one. That's one of the last original ones still standing.
It seems nostalgic when you're driving down or walking down Cannery Road.
I agree.
Especially for me that kind of grew up here and used to see that all the time. So anyway, Tim, it's really great that you came on, and we appreciate what you do in the community. And I just want to end with take Tim's tour, and you're going to be very happy. So Tim, thank you. Have a great day.
You too, Johnny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Tim Thomas, thank you so much for enlightening us on the great sardine era. That's how Monterey was put on the map. So anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Everybody have a great day.